Well, welcome to our virtual panel here for DragonCon Goes Virtual. This is the fantasy literature track, and this panel is called The Mystery, the Noir, and Crime. I am Kacey Ezell. I'll be your moderator. I'd like to start with having our wonderful panelists introduce themselves. But gentlemen, as you introduce yourself, if you would please, let the audience know also not only who you are and what you do, but why are you drawn to noir or crime or mystery fiction? Kind of what's the connection there that brings you here today? And we'll start with Stuart, since we're not sitting all in a row.
We're not in a line, in a row.
I'll just call on people.
Hi, everybody. I'm Stuart Jaffe. I'm the author of over 40 fantasy novels, a lot of urban fantasy, and best known for the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries, which are about a guy who moves to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and discovers his office is haunted by the ghost of a 1940s detective. And he does what anyone in that situation would do and starts a detective agency with a ghost. I take real history of the area, usually odd history and murders and things like that, and mix it with witches, ghosts, curses, and magic. As far as what's drawn me to noir and crime in general, well, I mean, I got into it probably long ago when I was little and watching the old movies, Humphrey Bogart and really old, the old black and white stuff. And I'm sure we'll get into that later. But and then it just kind of gradually. I mean, I was always, like many writers, I was a voracious reader, and you want something different after you've read every Heinlein book there was, and after you've read all the Alan Dean Foster you can stomach, and all the. I don't mean it like that. I mean, you just once you've gotten your fill for, you want something, you broaden out, and I discovered. Dashiell Hammett and all the big names and Mike Hammer. That was always the crime, the tough guy kind of stuff like that, and it just always has been part of me. I can't. I'm too old to think back to the actual genesis of it all. So that's the best I got for you.
No, that's great. That's exactly what I was looking for. Kind of, what was your gateway drug, if you will, to put it in crime fiction terms. All right, Alan, your turn.
Hi, my name is Alan Isom. I am, I guess, one of the newbie authors in this crowd, having only been involved with 3 books. Son of Cain, I don't know if that's going to show up very well there, but it was our first book that I co-wrote with some friends of mine, followed by first City of Cain, if you're noticing a trend, and then Blood of Cain, yes, and the whole trilogy is out. That is all there is to it. It's not ongoing beyond that, although there are some things in the works that are linked to it. They've been out for about a year total now, year and a half, although we started working on them long ago. I think one of the things that I have enjoyed talking about trying to wrap the crime and noir into it is that, in my mind, although I don't really have any proof of this, the old noir, kind of a Frenchy term for darkness, kind of, I guess it pulls in the flaws of humanity and treats some of the characters really more roughly when they're exaggerated, like some of the old originals like Sam Spade. But I think they kind of led into what we refer to nowadays as sort of the anti-hero, the flawed hero that we're rooting for despite all of his flaws, which I think even Iron Man and Marvel's MCU today falls into that category. But it gives us an opportunity to develop a character, to have him make mistakes instead of always being that white knight, and yet still have the readers rooting for them, and to present, I guess, a little more humanity, making it a 3-dimensional person instead of a 2D character.
Great. Yes, thanks. All right, Griffin, your turn.
So I come to it from I think probably my first real excitement about a noir film was either The Third Man, classic of noir film or noir American film, but I've been, Blade Runner, any number of those detective kind of gumshoe, hard-bitten folks, and the dames and that kind of thing were always kind of interesting to me. I've been fascinated by that. My day job as a police officer kind of leads me to see a lot of the darker aspects of what's going on with people in the first place. But then to kind of bring that into my fantasy and science fiction has been a way to kind of work out some of the inherent flaws in the system and that kind of thing to my eye, and be able to kind of process some of the things I've seen and witnessed. So I have Second Chance Angel that I co-authored with Kacey Ezell, which is a science fiction noir with AIs and that kind of thing, but is at its heart the rallying cry we had with the editor and amongst ourselves was more noir, with Christopher Walken, more cowbell from Saturday Night Live. So we kind of went with that. But then I've also written a lot of fantasy that I wrote again for a anthology called Noir Fatale, with, again, Kacey was editing it, and Larry Correa. And I wrote A Goddess in Red, which takes a character that I'm working on in a novel called Petty Necromancy. And she is not a nice person. And she's working against the system in a heist kind of situation and is betrayed by her lover, and she proves herself to be the ultimate femme fatale when betrayed. So that's kind of my intro to it, and I pretty much everything I've written going back I kind of look at. I also wrote a separate law for Star Citizen, the video game that's coming out someday, perpetually, and it was well received, and it actually got translated back into French just recently, or into French, I should say, recently, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, that is really cool. I thank you guys. I'm sorry if I sprang that little addendum to the introduction on you. So in the interest of fairness, I guess I'll answer the same question. Like I said, my name's Kacey Ezell. I write in multiple genres, and I, like Griffin said, I tend to kind of like to have that sort of darker edge to a lot of my favorite stories. Not all of my stories have them, but a lot of them do. My gateway drug into it was really the novels of Raymond Chandler. Anytime I talk about this genre or subgenre, I end up singing Chandler's praises, just because I really dug his, like, the way that he would string certain words together just to create such an evocative visual image. It just sort of resonated with me. So I got very interested in it and edited an anthology, and then wrote a novel with Griff that's, like we said, sci-fi, not fantasy. But what I want to start our conversation about here as we move on is we're throwing around these terms, right? Mystery fiction, noir fiction, crime fiction. So what are those, right? And what are they, and kind of what's the difference? Like, is there a difference between the three? Is there overlap? Where do you, in your mind, draw those lines, if anywhere at all? And Alan, if it's okay, we'll start with you this time.
I think that the fact that you're even asking that question shows that there's a huge amount of overlap. And you can always, yes, have a mystery without there being a crime. But the more you mix darkness into it, the more likely you are to find a story with a crime. And I think that the need for a crime in a lot of the stories for the popular piece of it is there because the human nature tends to cry out for justice. And so while we enjoy figuring out who done it, or what it is that's the mystery of something. Having a crime piece to it gives the reader a hunger for seeing it through, I think. And the noir aspect is always turning it into, in my mind anyway, I search also for the human condition in that if it's not too dark, too exaggerated, somebody that the readers can actually identify with. And I think that's an important part of reeling the reader into that world, whether it's 1920s Chicago gangland, modern day urban fantasy, science fiction, or a true high fantasy in a created world.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Griff, what do you think?
So the classic kind of definition of it that I'm aware of is literally black and white. It's the noir aspect, the dark aspect of filmmaking, particularly post-war filmmaking, and generally set in Europe in the post-war era, or at least dealing with the ramifications of the war on the ground. Usually it has to do with either a criminal organization and the government institution, which are both the millstones that grind the characters. Whether or not there's a crime that has been perpetrated by someone else and this third party is investigating that crime, or whether they are the perpetrator of the crime themselves and just trying to get away with it. They are going to be ground between the criminal element that they either may or may not serve and the government aspect that they may or may not serve or feel is appropriate government above them. And their navigation of this dark world where everybody's out to grind them is where the best kind of high pressure story can take place, because it's character driven, and usually there is no guarantee of a happy ending. If you take a more recent version of film, which a lot of people have kind of panned, Mulholland Falls is an excellent example of the genre, in that he's caught between the federal government, his own and the federal government, and his own malfeasance, his own crime against his wife by having an affair. And then at the end, he does all of these really criminal things, and yet doesn't get his wife back. It's left as a question whether or not she's going to accept him back. So it's, again, that whole, even if the character does the right thing, regardless of the systematic problems that he's faced with, regardless of the criminal element that's trying to do something to him, there's still no guarantee of a happy ending at the end, which is
Sure.
really informative to the genre, I think.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. All right, Stuart, your turn.
Definitions are slippery things. And
Sure.
and if you start defining genres, writers will say, "Oh, I can break that rule," however you want to define it. So, I mean, everything these gentlemen have said is absolutely true, and I think there's obviously certain elements to any mystery or crime fiction, like a crime, something to solve, and so forth. That's about the limit to defining it specifically. There's always going to be things that bleed in between. It's like trying to define subgenres of fantasy and science fiction, and then there's fantasy that is science fiction and vice versa, and all that. But I would say that in general, noir as a whole is has become a reaction towards more traditional, what you would just call a mystery. In a mystery, there's in a classic mystery, Agatha Christie or Sherlock Holmes, whatever. There's a crime. A detective goes out to solve it, and one of the key features is at the end of the mystery is solved, and the world is reset right. Yeah. But as Griffin was saying, a lot of noir, practically most of it, does not always end. And that's a key feature. It's really the dark, gritty. It's a stylized look at reality, just like the visuals of noir movies are extremely stylized. So it doesn't attempt to be real, but it attempts to be more realistic about the ugliness that comes with these mysteries, as opposed to, I can't think of the lady's name for Murder, She Wrote, walking around a little cove and solving these little murders like there's no blood involved in them, and there's a place for cozy mysteries like that, but this is the anti-cozy mystery.
Sure. I really like that term, the anti-cozy mystery. This is not on our topic at all, but I remember reading somewhere that somebody counted up like all of the Murder, She Wrote murders and was like, that town has the highest like per capita murder rate in the entire world, in all of history. So thankfully they're all fictional. But,
and you definitely don't want to be related to her, because you're definitely going to die.
That's right. Those were, all three of those were really great answers. And I really appreciated how each of you sort of mentioned some of the elements that are certainly hallmarks of noir fiction, and crime fiction and mystery fiction. So to kind of bring this back around to the fantasy realm, if you will, which elements of let's say noir to start with, which elements of noir do you think work particularly well in a fantasy context? And we can talk about urban fantasy, but also I'm really curious what you think about, kind of mashing up the two in a like an epic fantasy context. Is that even possible? Can you have a heroic noir fantasy?
I'm doing it right. I'm writing a trilogy for Falstaff Books, which will come out next year. We're doing all three. They're going to come out one a month, so two of them are done already.
Nice.
And it is that was what I was, that's what John Hartness, the publisher, he said, what I really want is an epic fantasy and a mystery mashed together. And I said, I'll do it. I'll try. And so the first one is basically a group going on a quest, but one of their members was murdered by one of the other members. And so the leader of the group has hired there's no real detectives in this world, but the smart guy, this guy who's known for solving the town's problems and all that, and basically has brought him in undercover. He's basically the new member of the group, but he's actually trying to suss out who the murderer is while they go on this quest to go fight the bad guy and all that. And then I realized that the second book, they're all taking different kind of mystery. So the second book is more of a not a cozy mystery, kind of a cozy mystery, but it's a kind of a locked door, locked room kind of thing, although it's a locked castle, and solving who stole something. And I actually have to start plotting out in about a week the third book, which probably is going to be more noirish, because it's going to take place in a city and deal with a lot of family issues and things like that. And I think that's part of what noir does also, is it's not just a lot of mysteries. It's the story is a mechanical thing. Okay. How was the murder done? And then from that, can we figure out who did it? Sherlock Holmes that's pretty much the entire thing of Sherlock Holmes is what devious way did the killer do the murder, and how brilliant was Sherlock Holmes in figuring it out. But noir starts looking at who these people are and what twisted thing went on in their life that caused them to get embroiled in this, and how and his sister, who's not even involved in the crime but is helping protect the criminal, why is she doing that, and all of that. So it gets a lot more personal.
Sure.
That kind of answer?
No, that's great. That's a great answer. I wonder if, without revealing any spoilers, if you wanted to share with us, like maybe like I said, one particular like aesthetic element, for example, that you think that you'll probably use in your third volume, since you identified that one as the most noirish of the three.
Oh, the noirish one.
Yeah.
That's easy to avoid spoilers because I have no idea what it's going to. I've got to finish the book I'm writing right now before I get to that one. But I do know. I mean, based on the way I ended the last one, where our hero, who's been solving the crimes throughout all this, he's going back to his home city to deal with his father and his brother, who there's a lot of animosity in there. And so there's going to be a crime connected to them. I don't even know if one of them is guilty of a crime or if it's a crime that's just connected to the family, but it's going to force our hero to come to terms, at least I shouldn't say he's going to come to terms. It's noir. Maybe he doesn't come to terms, but he's certainly going to have to face these issues. And,
Sure.
And like I said, I think that's a big noirish thing, is dealing with these inner demons and that, as opposed to every episode of Law and Order is practically not about the personal lives of these people. It's about the crime and how the crime is solved. I mean, Law and Order is not noir in aesthetic, but in structure, it can be considered very, very noirish from that. Or I mean, not noirish, but very procedural, which is another type of mystery that hits that. So,
yeah.
I've yapped enough.
Yeah, for sure.
The other guys should talk.
Well, Alan, let's hear from you. What do you? Gosh, I can't remember my question. What are the elements of noir fiction that you think work particularly well in a fantasy context?
I have to echo Stuart that I think that just about anything will translate. Part of it depends upon, if you're talking epic fantasy, just exactly how the world building has gone on. The trilogy that I wrote in, we've got a mystery that is trying to be solved. That is how the entire trilogy gets started. Characterizations, I think, are the things that come across most easily. So, for instance, our world was built on a D&D type world. Mm-hmm. So we've got some of those type of character classes when you start talking about the professions that the individuals were built upon. And so when you get into certain of those characters, they are, I guess, archetypally driven. So, for instance, your Rangers, there's an element when they run into certain types of creatures or characters that basically just, they become rage monsters in their own account. There's just a deep-seated hatred for a certain, I guess, archetypal enemy there that they have a very difficult time, if they can at all, to control themselves in that type of an environment. And so I think that type of a character flaw gets back to that black and white, good and evil type thing. You run into other types of characters who, from their perspective, they're not necessarily doing anything wrong, or if they are, it's set aside because, well, that's the way their family operates.
Sure.
So I think that character is the thing from noir that comes across most easily.
Okay, sure. How about you, Griffin?
One of the aspects of the of noir that we haven't really talked about is veterancy. Most of the classic noir films and even into the modern era were veterans. So if you were to take that and transplant it into an epic fantasy setting, or the seminal epic fantasy setting, The Lord of the Rings, if you told The Lord of the Rings from the point of view of Boromir and then subsequently Faramir's survival, that is effing noir. Because here you got this guy who's conflicted about what's going on. He's doing the right thing, but he has a really strong idea about, hey, we need to take this stuff back. We need to take it back to my home, and we will fight the good fight, and we will win. And everybody's telling him, no, we can't do that. And then he's killed, and Faramir doesn't know how he's killed. He only knows what he's told. And then Faramir is told by his father, go out there and fight the good fight. You're going to die, and he almost dies, etc. I think that is a really good way to kind of look at the caught between a rock and a hard place, and trying to make moral choices and possibly failing, and then also seeing the darkness firsthand, and then what happens afterwards. So I don't know. Maybe somebody who's more of a Lord of the Rings scholar will be able to tell me, but I don't know what happens to Faramir after Dad tries to burn him to death after his grievous wounding. I think he recovers, but
yeah, he marries I Am No Man, doesn't he? Eowyn. Yeah, doesn't he marry Eowyn? So he gets the girl. So there's that.
So interestingly enough, I think there's a lot of
big deal in Tolkien. There aren't that many girls to get. So
yeah, that's true.
It's true.
But anyway, I thought it was kind of an interesting thing. One of the things that is popularized in epic fantasy is the evil overlord. And that evil overlord is the absolute perfect example of a government that might be overreaching.
Sure.
And then, so if you combine that with a criminal element, Jimmy the Hand from Raymond Feist's Magician series, there's a lot of aspects of that where it could go really, really noir, but it doesn't, because it's a product of its time and that kind of thing. But there are certainly moments where you could get really, really noir, and I seek to do that in my fantasy.
So, true confession, guys, when I was about 11, I totally had a crush on Jimmy the Hand. So I absolutely loved that series. Yeah. No, that's a great answer too, Griff. I appreciate that. And I think you're right. I think that certainly several of the chapters set in Krondor dealing with the Thieves Guild had a lot of noirish elements to them. What are some of your favorite examples of, and you can't use that one because I already said Jimmy the Hand is my boy. But what are some of your favorite examples of like fantasy noir mashups, excluding your own work? The stuff you've seen, and it can be. It doesn't just have to be written. It could be games, could be film. Whatever you think. Alan, we'll start with you.
I'll have to say that The Black Company by Glenn Cook.
Oh, yeah.
Just absolutely one of the best. And if you've never read it, to the people that are watching this later, I highly recommend you go check it out. It's a classic series.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one. Stuart, how about you?
Well, I'll throw in a movie, which is Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. This is, I see somebody who recognizes this, thank goodness. This is a movie that was back when Steve Martin was in his heyday. Yeah. And he made a comedy that's done as a black and white noir film that intersperses him and other actors with actual clips from classic movies and weaves an entire story out of it. So you'll have his character having a conversation with Bogart or Lauren Bacall or whoever, and it's amazingly done. First of all, it's clear that Carl Reiner was involved within it, and they love the genre. They poke fun at the genre, of course, but I'm sorry?
There's only somebody who loves it and is intrinsically aware.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And they also went to extreme lengths to try and make it blended in. I remember this a long time ago watching a thing about it where, one of the things that's most famous about noir film is its lighting style.
Yep.
And this was not, this was one of those things where an artist was constricted by reality and turned it into a style. And nobody sat there and said, "Ooh, let's do this cool lighting style." What happened was the companies didn't have money or capability. They're like, well, we can't afford 7 big lights to just completely light this. And so somebody, I don't know who was the first to do it, said, well, we're stuck with the room lighting, creates just tons of shadows. Let's do what we can with it. And from that, you created an actual aesthetic and style. But they found when they had to match these, old films with new techniques, and they said it was so difficult to try and fake what was just natural lighting back then. I found it fascinating, but it's a great fun film, and it also is a primer for it'll give you a huge list of actual films to go watch, of actual noir films.
That is a fantastic answer, and it is a great movie. Do you have any examples of like fantasy noir mashups that
I was trying to think of that, because a lot of fantasy, now, gets dark. Griffin was saying in his answer before about these things being a product of their time, that there were veterans and all that, and that's because it all came out of the 1940s, right after World War II, and during the war and all that as well. And you also mentioned Raymond Feist, and in the 80s and all, you really couldn't. I'm sure somebody did, but it wasn't. The populist mind wasn't looking for that kind of dark, dirty, gritty thing. When we've come back to that, you get people like Abercrombie and all that writing, this gritty fantasy, and suddenly the idea of mashing in a noir is not so it has more of a palatable ability. And there's stuff always going on all the time, but in terms of what it was highly popular. So so right now I think we're in a kind of a weird mix where you have this gritty fantasy kind of been growing out for the last bunch of years. And I think you're going to see more and more of these mysteries coming in. I don't have a specific example of a mystery that really falls in that directly. I mean, I can think more in science fiction of like the classic Asimov robot mysteries and those kind of things, which certainly took a more playful, but certainly took that hard-boiled detective kind of thing. And and you have urban fantasy, plenty of it, but big epic fantasy, not as much, I think, but it's coming.
Yeah. Remind me, I have a follow-up question, but we'll go to Griffin first, so I'm not ignoring him. Griffin, your turn. Your example of a favorite fantasy noir mashup.
So, well, first off, it's more of a graphic novel. The Dark Knight, Batman's The Dark Knight, is, he's the perennial noir figure. And they've made a bunch of animated films of them that they really went with the film aesthetic, where they took black paper and drew on it in color. So it's bringing light out of the darkness, which is exactly what the noir kind of thing sensibility is. But then maybe The Lies of Locke Lamora. He engages in this heist, and the whole point of the heist is eventually to, spoiler alert, sacrifice to the god. And wow, that's like some serious. He's from
that blew me away. I remember reading it and being like, "What?"
Lowest strata of society. He's taken in by this organization that's kind of outside of priesthoods, regular priesthoods, and the regular society. And so he's. I think it's a really good, especially a modern, and it's a masterpiece of a heist novel. But then the ending result, where he doesn't get to enjoy the wealth that he has sacrificed everything for, is very noir for me.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so here's the follow-up question. Do you think that the grimdark fantasy genre is that fantasy noir? Is that what has filled that? Well,
I think noir is more than just being, dark and an aesthetic. So it's that's why, when I was trying to answer the question the first time, I was trying to think of fantasy that actually has a noir mystery in it.
Yeah.
And I think there's noir as an aesthetic, the broader ideas of it, it's being dark, it being gritty, it being more character oriented. The crimes are darker. There's certainly fantasies that might use those things. Every genre could use that. You could even write I'm sure there are romances that are dark romances and gritty romances. But there is a difference between, a noir mystery and a vampire story, right? Just because they're both dark and gritty doesn't make them both noir. And just putting a vampire in a room with moonlight coming through slats on or coming through Venetian blinds doesn't make it noir. It may not at noir, but there's a difference, I think. Not that I could draw a hard line on it, because that's kind of goes back to the beginning question about genres. They slip and slide quite easily. And I think with most genres, a lot of it is, when you see it kind of a thing.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. I know that's not a definitive answer for you, but that's the best I can give you.
Alan or Griffin, anything to add?
I'll have to admit I have not read much in the grimdark at this point. Just time has not allowed it when you're working 50 and 60 hours a week. But I tend to agree with Stuart that I think it's more of a dark and gritty as opposed to noirish. Now, that's not to say they couldn't have a mystery-driven grimdark that is noirish, not by any, I mean, that's eminently possible. But I do tend to think that noir asks for a bit of a mystery to be involved with it. Kind of like Simon R. Green's Hawk and Fisher series, which it's really not quite dark enough, I think, to be considered noir, but it's certainly got elements of it. But I think grimdark does tend to just focus more on the dark than the bringing the light out of it.
Okay. Oh, that's a really cool distinction, bringing the light out of the dark. That's neat. Griffin, anything to add?
I definitely don't think that grimdark is by definition noir. I don't think it. I think it has its own aesthetic, and it's a response to epic fantasy much more than it is a response to anything else. Sure. It's especially in the quintessential Abercrombie, grimdark. I think he might have even coined the term. It's not noir. It has elements of it in some of the work, but generally not what I would call noir.
I think it's important also to note that as much as we keep talking about the dark, gritty aspect, which is a part of noir, it doesn't mean all noir is like a downer. Right. There are if you think about, I'm trying to think of some bogey movies. And many of them, even like the Maltese Falcon or something, where they don't get away. The bad guys might get away with stuff to an extent. In the end, your detective hero, he's going to be okay. It's not all the Black Dahlia or L.A. Confidential or so, that kind of like everybody is just horrible human being in the cesspool of LA. It can be that, but it's not always.
See, I would even argue that LA Confidential ends on almost a slightly hopeful note.
The film
does. Yeah, not the book. The film. Sorry, I do need to clarify. LA Confidential, the film, ends on a hopeful note.
Yeah, that's Hollywood.
Yeah. But it's. I would still characterize the film as still being a good noir story.
Oh yeah.
The story.
Griff and I have gone round and round about this.
It is. I mean, so taking. His name just went out of my head. Who wrote the book?
Elroy.
I had James. Yeah. I couldn't get the Elroy part. Elroy adapting his stuff to film, which has been done quite a number of times, is always a very tricky thing because he he was one of those writers who really, the language was a big part of what makes his writing work. And he was I'm sure you guys know, he was a very troubled human being who had a very, very rough life.
Dude,
so
James is still alive. He's still with us.
Is he?
Yes, he's a friend. He's a friend.
It's so troubled that he's come back. And
he's a friend of a friend, actually.
That's cool.
But he, his writing is, it's, I can't imagine. I can, because they've been made into movies, but I've yet to see a movie where I'm just like, that really captured the experience of reading those books. So.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So we talked about your favorites. What if you were, emperor of the universe for a day? What noir or crime or mystery or all three fantasy mashup would you like to see? Would you, you could snap your fingers and it already existed, was there for you to enjoy?
Oh man,
I'd like to see a remake of Outland.
Oh,
that's just me. That combines a Western with a noir sensibility. So
yeah.
On is it the moon of Jupiter or Saturn? I forget. Io. Yeah. That's a long time ago. Yeah. Well, I've got the Double Indemnity in my mind, which is a classic noir. Mm-hmm. That might be a fun one to. One of the things about noir that's also really cool is all the you think one thing's going on and it's going to switch on you, and this everything keeps countering itself. It doesn't always happen, but that can be a lot of fun. And the guy is hired, but he doesn't even he's not hired for what he thinks he's hired for, and so there's a lot of stuff like that, which would fit within any. I mean, you could set up any fantasy to work with it. I think. I've lost the thread of that. Alan's just dying to answer this right now. I can see. Save me.
Alan, you got anything?
I am struggling to remember. It's a set of books that I read. They probably had a few come out since, and I am struggling to remember the author and even the full titles. They were fantasy mysteries, and as I recall, they were noir-ish. But I'm struggling with them. There was an element in all of the titles of metal. So there's like a tin something, gold, copper, but I can't recall them. But I would love to have seen those converted into film.
This is where the virtual panel suffers, because somebody in the audience would have been like,
I know.
Definitely.
Would have been
Absolutely.
Yes.
So just so you know, Dragon Con attendees, you are an essential part of this process, and we really, really miss you.
I don't know if this is the quintessential mashup I'd love to see, but it's one that's mashing in my head right now that I really would like. Is Double Indemnity mashed with the classic manga Lone Wolf and Cub, and put those two together with some type of fantasy Milo of dragons and that kind of thing. That I think would be a lot of fun.
Yeah. I have a very good friend of mine is a huge Lone Wolf and Cub fan. He actually cosplayed Lone Wolf and Cub with his infant daughter at Dragon Con a couple years ago.
The films now, they're on HBO Max.
The films, those are strange films. If you've ever read the series, to see those films, they're like very, very different things. But those films were done in like the 70s, I think, or
they were done. There were like 8 of them, and they were done in like the space of 2 years.
Yeah.
So there was a little rush to production.
So let's change gears just a little.
I got it.
Yes, please go ahead.
The Garrett P.I. series.
Again,
Glenn Cook.
I was going to say it's Glenn Cook again. Yeah.
Sweet Silver Blues, Bitter Gold Hearts, Cold Copper Tears, Old Tin Sorrows, and it goes on for a total of 14 of them. But that was the series I was trying to remember that I think that would make a fantastic transition from the written to film.
Yeah, Glenn Cook. he doesn't write much, not at all.
It's like Stuart when he's like, yeah, I've got like 40 novels. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I have like 6. If you guys don't mind, I'd love to answer this one too. I would love to see anything by Raymond Chandler, but done in that sort of epic fantasy setting. Because I think that you could still have the detective character, but you'd have to obviously work it into your world building. So, the dude would have to be essentially, what you were saying, Stuart, just, here's a guy who's known to be a smart guy that solves a lot of problems, and people come to him and pay him to solve these problems. Some of the other sort of classic noir elements of, that Griffin's talking about, like the overreaching government, and, maybe you work with the police department, maybe the police department's slightly dirty, maybe they're good guys, but how do you, I would love to see that done and see Chandler's work kind of cast into that. I think that would be really cool.
Well, with any luck in May, you'll have it.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, man. I really am. Yeah.
The other one that is The Name of the Rose.
Yeah.
Echo.
Yes.
That's kind of a cool setting, and something combining that with basically any epic fantasy that deals with religion smartly, which there's not a whole lot of them.
Yeah.
Would be fun.
Yeah, that would be really cool. So let's talk about for a second, kind of some of that world building that I mentioned that you'd have to do in order to take, your classic detective story, whether it be a hard-boiled story or a noir story, or, straight up procedural even, and cast that into a fantasy setting. It's been done very successfully in urban fantasy for sure. There's innumerable examples. Dresden Files is a great one. A lot of Laurel K. Hamilton's work is with her Anita Blake stuff, and her Mary Gentry series, where Mary Gentry is an actual detective. A lot of examples like that. What kind of world building? How do you do that world building that you do in an epic fantasy? And Stuart, you have to go last since you're currently doing this. So we'll start with Griffin this time.
So the elements that we talked about is, trying to define the genre. We certainly have to go into it, but you can substitute a lot of the governmental stuff with religion. If they're, like an omnipresent cult, or that's very restrictive, and that kind of thing. You can do a lot of interesting world building, also with racism and that kind of thing going on as well. One of the things I've always kind of posited and find fascinating is that we as human beings are kind of already primates with the whole in-group, out-group stuff that goes on. We're already kind of triggered by the very simplest of differences. But could you imagine those differences if we were faced with somebody who was immortal, like an elf, and how tempting it would be for an elf to just grind on this. With, I have 1,000 years to play games with you. And, talk about deep state or any of that kind of craziness. And it might actually be true if you had somebody who was an immortal vampire or that kind of thing. So there's a lot of really cool playthings to use as components for building a noir universe.
They did that in Bright. Well, that's another urban fantasy example, but yeah, I also thought that was cool that they played with that sort of racism when there's an actual different race involved.
Not just some,
not just another part of the human race, but an actual different race.
I think that's something that noir doesn't directly address, because it's pretty much all white. But it's something that could be addressed in the modern sensibility and addressed well. Yeah.
Alan, what do you have?
Well, I think that, going along with what he was saying, one of the elements that fantasy provides is magic. He's talking about, an elf living for 1,000 years. Well, what about, your witch kings and your necromancers and all of that, who, could set up to rule an area, or even the autocratic government that's got mages or wizards in their employ, and that's how they ferret out people's secrets, and the mental hygiene police equivalents, and those types of things. But I think a lot of the world building needs to have those elements, if not in your face, in the background, but you also have to get down into the nitty-gritty personal level, where you're dealing with the neighborhood, not just the kingdom. You're dealing with the stuff that makes the person who's there, the character, be it the villain that may be the main character that the heroes are trying to corral, or the anti-hero equivalent. You've got to have their world, I guess, be believable. So
Sure.
You've got to get down into enough details that the building blocks have continuity.
Sure. Yep. Excellent point. All right, Stuart, tell us how it's done. How do you world build for fantasy noir?
Well, here's an angle for it. I mean, in terms of world building, I think a lot of what's been said is spot on. I think in terms of actually writing the novels in that mixing these two genres, the big challenge, more so than I think bringing mystery into any other genre, is that you have to satisfy both genres. In other words, like with Asimov's robot mysteries, it's a mystery with a science fiction aesthetic, and a science fiction is at the core of the problem. They blend very easily. But an epic fantasy at its core is some type of quest, whether that quest literally takes you traveling or whether it's a quest within your own house. There's some, it's good versus evil. It usually goes into this big epic battle of some sort. And then you have a mystery, which in itself is usually not that big. It's not, you can have a mystery where the fate of the world is at who killed the president or something, but usually it's not. It's more personal. It's more, especially in noir, it's more about how this small act of violence affected all these lives. Mm-hmm. So trying to blend those two was and is, I think, quite a challenge, and to serve both things. And the way I'm dealing with it is, I'm a plotter anyway. I plot out my novels. I essentially plot out two novels, a mystery novel and an epic fantasy novel, and try and make sure that their arcs match, so that the solution of the mystery, the climax of the mystery, is happening during the epic battle and ideally they both affect each other. That's the goal. We'll find out next year whether you all think I succeeded or not, and I'll find out in a few weeks whether my editor thinks I succeeded or not. But that's the big challenge, and I really, it's a lot of fun, and it's very different than my Max Porter mysteries, which are urban fantasy. That's just a mystery. It's a mystery with magic and witches and curses, but it's all just wrapped up together. Mm-hmm. And this is all happening around each other, which I find fascinating and fun. But I think that's structurally, I think it's the most difficult mashup I've ever had to deal with. So.
Sure. What's interesting to me is what you described as your process of essentially creating, the two arcs of the story, and then, laying them one over the other and ensuring that they match appropriately. Sounds very much like what a musician friend of mine who has made mashup mixes before described, of making a good mashup in music, is you find the songs that when you overlay them, they're arcs, although that's not a proper musical term, mm-hmm. but they line up appropriately. So I thought that was interesting that you used that same language. Wow, this has been really fun, guys. And I am amazed to look at my clock and see that almost our entire hour has passed. And I would be remiss if I did not keep with the Dragon Con tradition of a few minutes here at the end to allow all of the authors to plug your own work. So if you have copies of your books available or cover art available that you want to show off to the audience, we can go in order. And Griffin, we'll start with you. So what you got?
Well, when this comes out, that weekend, Kacey and my book, Second Chance Angel, which is science fiction noir, will be coming out at that time. And it's funny, Stuart, you mentioned Asimov and his noir things. Eric Flint gave us a blurb and says that it's AI detective theme hasn't been done this well since Isaac Asimov's Liz Bailey and R. Daniel Olival novels. So pretty
very kind.
There you go.
He was very generous to us. I was also lucky enough to land a spot in Laurel K. Hamilton's Fantastic Hope series. And this is noir. My story in this is it's called Broken Sun, and it's straight up science. It's again science fiction, but it's very noir. And it's the very first line is well shit. It ends up a little bit more positively than most noirs because that's the whole theme of the anthology. And then I'm in a couple of other places as well, and I'm working on a couple of other projects. Kacey and I just finished outlining the mystery and the noir of Second Chance Angel sequel, The Third Sin. Hopefully it'll be coming to you soon from Blackstone Publishing as well. And that's about what I've got right now.
Awesome. Thanks. Alan, you're up. You showed us at the beginning, but feel free to show us again because your cover art is beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, try to get it all in there. The Son of Cain is the leadoff book in our trilogy. The action starts off in the capital city of a kingdom where the local king's spy master has been had his eye on this caravan that keeps going in and out of town. And they are certain they're smuggling something because they're taking a long duration caravan out through the Badlands, which are orc infested and whatnot else. And they're selling soap. Can't make money on this. So what are they really doing? What are they smuggling? And so the heroes are your contractors, if you will, the troubleshooters who are hired to solve this rather than using the king's own troubleshooters. And so the mystery begins to unravel as they try to solve the what's being smuggled issue. And of course, the caravan leaves town before they can solve it. And so the heroes have to follow the caravan, and others begin showing interest in this caravan. And, why are these other people showing interest? What's going on? And things just begin to snowball grossly out of control. Originally, this was a single novel concept, but it wound up being too long. And when you're not David Weber or Stephen King, you can't publish something that long in one thing. So our 3 books are a single story arc. So some people have accused us of cliffhangers at the ends of books 1 and 2, but the whole trilogy is out now. So don't let that dissuade you.
Well, you're in good company because the same exact thing happens to a guy by the name of John Roald Rule Token. So, all right, Stuart. Show us the goods.
If I can get it there. Anyway, that's this is the compilation of the first 3 Max Porter books. They're all titled the Southern Bound, Southern Charm, Southern Bound. It's always Southern something. And the book 13, Southern Blood, just came out last month. So if you like it, there's plenty of them. And like I said, this particular thing I just showed was a compilation of the first 3, and there's 4 of those volumes out there. So easy to get into. Available on ebook, print, and audiobook every way you can want it.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. If you guys don't mind, I will show off. Griffin already showed you guys Second Chance Angel, which is my latest sort of noir work. This is Noir Fatale. edited by myself and Larry Correa. It's a collection of stories that specifically focus on the noir archetype of the femme fatale, that are either science fiction or fantasy stories. Griffin's story is super noir, and it's super good. It's one of my, I say this about every story that we put in this, is that it was one of my favorites, but they really were. If you like the noir genre, you're gonna like this one. So this is available from Baen Books. It's also available now in mass market paperback too. So give it up for cheap books. All right, well, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in and checking us out and listening to what we had to say about kind of some intersectional genre things that we have going on here. For DragonCon Fantasy Literature Track. My name again is Kacey Ezell, and it has been my absolute pleasure to moderate this panel for you. And I hope you guys have a great virtual DragonCon, and we will see you next year when it will be on, hopefully. So, all right. Bye, guys. Thank you.